John 16. These things have I spoken unto you, that you should not lose faith. They shall put you out of the synagogues. Yea, the time cometh, that whosoever killeth you will think that he doeth God service. And these things will they do unto you, because they have not known the Father nor me. But these things have I told you, that when the time shall come you may remember that I told you of them. And these things I said not unto you at the beginning, because I was with you. But now I go my way to him that sent me, and none of you asketh me, Whither goest thou? But because I have said these things unto you, sorrow has filled your heart. George Hutcheson's Commentary on the Gospel of John, Chapter 16. This commentary was published in the year 1657. In this chapter, wherewith this farewell sermon is closed, Christ goes on to let out more of his heart to his disciples, and does resume many of the most necessary points formerly spoken of, and sweetly enlarges the same. The chapter may be taken up in four principal parts, and the first, in which Christ further prosecutes that purpose begun in a former chapter concerning their sufferings, in which he intimates his scope and foretelling thereof, verse 1, expresses more particularly what sufferings they were to meet with, verse 2, propounds grounds of encouragement under such a lot, verses 3 and 4, and gives a reason why he did no sooner give them this distinct warning, verse 4. In the second part of the chapter, he again intimates his departure, reprehending their abuse of this warning, verses 5 and 6, and encourages them against the bitterness of this lot. First, by the promise of the Holy Spirit, who would not come but on his departure, verse 7, and who being come would convince the world, verse 8 to 11, instruct them, verses 12 and 13, and glorify him by what he should communicate of and from him who was one and equal with the Father, verses 14 and 15. Commentary, verse 1. These things have I spoken unto you, that you should not be offended. In the first part of the chapter, Christ prosecutes his former doctrine concerning his disciples' sufferings in four particulars. In the first, in which in this verse he points out what he aimed at in intimating and foretelling this their hard lot, namely, that by this warning they might be so armed and so fortified by the encouragement subjoined as not to stumble at it when it comes to pass. So learn, number 1, Christ speaks nothing to his people at random, but what he has well digested is needful for them, and which they should accordingly ponder and esteem of. Therefore does he shortly resume what he had spoken as being of much importance, and seriously to be thought upon by them. These things have I spoken unto you, number 2. It is not enough to consider what Christ says, unless also we take notice of his scope in speaking of it, which oft times we are ready to mistake unless he reveal it. Therefore, whereas they might be ready to sink in sorrow upon this intimation, he tells them he has another scope in it. These things have I spoken to you, that you should not be offended. Number 3. It is no strange thing to see many things concerning Christ's person, doctrine, way of dealing, and so on, occur as stumbling blocks in the way of professors, to make them fall and turn out of the way, and particularly afflictions and persecutions accompanying Christ in the gospel are grievous stumbling blocks, and do prove a neck break to many. For it is here supposed that by reason of this lot they will be ready to be offended, or stumbled, or scandalized, to divert them from good and tempt them to make apostasy. Number 4. Afflictions and persecutions are so searching and trying that even the best have need to be guarded against a scandal of it. For even disciples have need to be spoken unto, that they be not offended. Number 5. How strongly soever temptations and prejudices may seem to plead for stumbling at Christ in a day of trial, yet it is most necessary that professors do not stumble, seeing there is no safe retreat without a neck break. Therefore, he propounds it as a necessary duty that, however matters go they be not offended. Number 6. Whatever stumbling blocks be laid in the way of professors, and how many soever stumble and fall upon them, yet there are sufficient means to prevent their stumbling, and to convince them that there is no just cause why they should offend. For here he intimates that he had taken sufficient course that they should not be offended. Number 7. The word of Christ, and particularly his intimation of the cross, and encouragements against the same, is a sufficient guard against offenses and scandals at the cross. For first, his intimation warns men of their danger, so that they have themselves to blame if they be not armed with resolution, but still promise great things to themselves. And it does assure believers that he has an eternal purpose and effectual providence about these things, which he can foretell before they come to pass. Next, he guards this intimation with so many encouragements and antidotes in the word as it cannot prove deadly to them that improve the same. The word rightly improven does purge out idols and lusts which tempt men to stumble. It does direct their way in dark cases that they may not stumble, and afford such confirmations of faith as may support their hearts under trouble, and such intimations of the severity of God as may deter them from apostasy. Therefore, saith he, these things, both of intimation and encouragement mentioned in the former chapter, have I spoken unto you, that you should not be offended. Not only was this the scope of his doctrine and intimation, but these were a sufficient means to prevent their stumbling. However, they, not improving the same, were offended for a time. Matthew 26:31. John 16 verse 2. They shall put you out of the synagogues. Yea, the time comes that whosoever kills you will think that he does God's service. In the second place, he more particularly expresses what sufferings they were to meet with, not naming every particular kind of suffering, but instancing in two of the saddest kinds of it, which may comprehend all the rest as inferior thereunto. 1. A spiritual censors of the church, of which excommunication is the saddest. The other, of bodily sufferings, in which a violent death is the sharpest. Both these he warns them of, foretelling that they may look for excommunication from the Jews as a church, of which see chapter 9 verse 34 and chapter 12:42. And for violent deaths from them or others in a tumultuous way, or from civil authority abusing their powers, yea, and that they may look in their saddest sufferings to be laden with reproach, their persecutors, through blind zeal, thinking it acceptable service, and a sweet-smelling sacrifice to God to put them to death. And speaking of excommunication and death, he subjoins death to the former as sadder than it, not because it is simply sadder to die than to be cut off from the society and privileges of God's people, if their excommunication had been such, but because in this case their excommunication was unjust, and therefore the less to be regarded. And albeit they did suffer death also unjustly, yet it was more sharp in respect that death is naturally bitter to men, and because that by death they were cut off from doing service to their master, in which they might go on in their work, notwithstanding the sentence of excommunication. For it is further to be considered, that beside that this sentence was eminently unjust in regard of the cause, being for preaching in the name of Christ, the Jews, after their rejecting of the offer of Christ that was first to be made to them, Acts 13:46, did become no church, and so had no power of church censors, and consequently any they inflicted were null in themselves. And however they had continued a church, yet the apostles, being general officers, were above the reach of any particular church power, and consequently, however such a sentence might now affright them to think of it, when they were rude and ignorant, and afterward it might be some trial in so far as it did render them odious and suspected to them who could not discern aright, and so put some stop to the success of their ministry, yet the sentence being null, they might warrantably go on, yet not at all leading a preparative to any particular ministers to contemn the sentence of a true church upon their own allegiance or judgment of the corruption of it, and of the injustice of the cause of the sentence, as may be cleared from what is said. Application. Number 1. As persecution and the cross usually accompany Christ and his followers, so general resolutions for afflictions are not of any worth unless men also lay their account and resolve on what in particular they may meet with. Therefore he warns them particularly what they may expect, that they may accordingly be resolved. Number 2. Such followers of Christ as would be armed indeed ought to resolve that they will meet with, not one, but many trials of all sorts, and that they may be assayed with the utmost violence that men's malice can invent, or their power in church or state can reach, either in an orderly or tumultuous way. Therefore he forewarns them of a variety of particular trials, and that in the greatest extremity. Number 3. A fixed resolution through the power of Christ's grace may carry a saint through the greatest difficulties he can meet with, for all these are propounded as things they may get digested in their resolutions. See Acts 20 verses 23 and 24. Number 4. Followers of Christ may lay their account not only to be persecuted by pagans or openly profane men, but even by church members, yea, and church guides, or they who pretend to be so. For whereas he had foretold them of the world's hatred, chapter 15:18, now he explains it, that even they who have power to put out of synagogues would be against them. Number 5. Albeit a church censure unjustly inflicted, and by them who are no church, or have no such power, be of no weight before God, yet it is an affliction, requiring much resolution in the sufferers, that persecutors account themselves not only a church, but the only true church, yea, and are very eminent in power in it, and account Christ's suffering followers not worthy to have room in it, but that they ought to be excommunicated. For in this respect he propounds it as a trial to be digested by them, that shall put you out of the synagogues. Number 6. When followers of Christ have tasted of lesser sufferings, they are not to sit down there, but to lay their account that they may meet yet with sadder, and by bearing lesser troubles, they are to prepare themselves for greater. Therefore he subjoins a violent death as a trial to be expected after they are excommunicated. Number 7. The consideration of sadder sufferings which saints have endured, and ourselves may meet with, ought to sweeten lesser trials and make us digest them with a greater moderation, and will do so if we are preparing as we ought for these sad things. Therefore he teaches them to swallow up the thoughts of excommunication, with apprehending what sadder things they should make ready for. Quote, they shall put you out of the synagogues, yea, or but, the time comes that they shall kill you. Number 8. As no extremity of torment can justify men in denying Christ and his truth, nor will prevail with them who love and cleave to him to do so, so followers of Christ ought to prescribe no measure of sufferings for themselves to endure, less than a violent death itself for Christ's cause. Therefore he does require that they have a resolution even to be killed in this quarrel. Whosoever kills you. Number 9. Death itself were easy to be digested by saints, if so be the quarrel and their integrity were clearly owned. But they must resolve to have shame and ignominy accompanying their cross, to be buried under ignominy and calumnies, as if they were malefactors, and their cause to be traduced as unjust, odious, seditious, and so on. For this is the bitter sting of their suffering, that persecutors pretend they are for God, even in persecuting them. Whosoever kills you will think that he does God service. See also Hebrews 12, verse 2. Number 10. Corrupt and erroneous men may have much blind zeal in their false way, which is very furious and violent, and a cause of much cruelty and bloodshed against true professors. For from this zeal does their cruelty flow. Whosoever kills you will think that he does God service. Number 11. It will never justify men's actions that they have good intentions in them, or follow their blinded conscience and zeal, but they may grossly err under these pretexts, unless what they do be warranted by the word. For they had all these pretenses who killed the apostles. Whosoever kills you will think that he does God service. Verse 3. And these things will they do unto you, because they have not known the Father nor me. In the third place, he subjoins two lenitives and encouragements to sweeten his hard lot, and make them digest it. The first, in this verse, is taken from the original and cause of persecutors' malice, which is their ignorance of the Father and him. See chapter 15, verse 21. Application number 1. Persecutors of God's children, as taking no notice who they are, betray their ignorance of God and Christ, at least insofar as they persecute. Were they never so good otherwise? For these things will they do to you, because they have not known the Father nor me. Number 2. Men who are and continue ignorant of God and Christ are in a hazard to turn persecutors if they have the temptation. For this being the cause of persecution, it is no wonder the effect follow upon it. Number 3. Albeit it be in itself a sad case, that so many men pretending to be for God should yet be ignorant of him and his Son, yet it should sweeten the sad cup of sufferers, that they know their persecutors are so ignorant. For the quarrel may comfort them. They need not fear them who are not approving of God. And if he be not known, they should not take it ill if they be not acknowledged for what they are. 1 John 3, verse 1. Therefore does he comfort them by letting them see this ignorance of persecutors. Verse 4. But these things have I told you, that when the time shall come, you may remember that I told you of them. And these things I said not unto you at the beginning, because I was with you. The next lenitive and encouragement in the beginning of this verse is that this prediction should be useful and comfortable to remember it when it came to be accomplished. So learn first, as much as heard by God's people, in which they reap little profit, until affliction bring them to remember it. So in particular, afflictions will bring the doctrine of the cross to remembrance. For when the time shall come, you may remember that I told you. Number 2. It is most necessary that God's people be forewarned in peaceable times of approaching trouble, if not for any present use they get of it, yet because of what it may produce afterward. For these things have I told you, that when the time shall come you may remember. Number 3. However predictions of trouble by Christ may be ready to sadden the hearts of saints, yet the prediction, being compared with the event and the remembrance of it, when it comes to pass, is very comfortable. The prediction of it beforehand, serving to acquaint us therewith before it come, that we may be disposed for it, by a voluntary resolution and patience, serving also to prove him to be the omniscient God, and that he is a providence in our troubles, and is not an idle spectator of them, and the certainty of his predictions being verified in a manner of trials, may assure us of the certainty of what he foretells concerning our deliverance. Zechariah 13, verses 14 and 15. Therefore is this given them as an encouragement. But these things have I told you, that when the time shall come you may remember that I told you of them. In the fourth and last place, in the end of the verse, Christ, having told the usefulness of foretelling this now, obviates an objection and gives a reason why he gave warning no sooner, namely because he was with them, and so as they were tender and weak, needing his bodily presence, so he was the great butt of men's malice at that time, and they lurked safely under his shadow. Albeit Christ had formerly inculcated that disciples behoved to take up their cross, and had told them much of their hard lots when he gave them their first commission, Matthew 10. Yet he says, these things I said not unto you at the beginning, not only because they were a while with him, even before he had said so much to them, and before they were called to the apostleship, nor yet only because he gave them now, verse 2, a more distinct and particular intimation of the kind and degrees of their suffering than at any time formerly, but chiefly what he formerly foretold at a distance, he now foretells of things that were shortly after his removal to be assayed with. Application number 1. Christ is a prudent and tender guide of his followers and knows the fit seasons of tender usage, of general intimations of troubles at distance, of putting them in mind to make for approaching trouble, and of laying the cross actually on. For so much is important in his not telling his disciples at the first what he now tells them, and they afterward met with. Number 2, his not telling his disciples these things at the beginning, because he was with them, may serve to teach us in all ages that Christ is so tender of his followers' weakness, that he will not put them to hard assays till they be confirmed and trained and fitted for them. Therefore did he at first stay with them as a tutor and safeguard, and train them up with seeing sufferings endured in his person till they themselves were confirmed. Matthew 9:16 and 17. So that when Christ puts saints to trials, they may reckon they are fitted for them, unless they have neglected the opportunity, or do for present cast away their confidence. Number 2, Christ's presence is the only sweet shelter and safeguard against troubles and storms. For as he gave them an easy life while he was with them, Matthew 9:15, so in all cases his spiritual presence will arm sufficiently against trouble, if not to prevent it, yet to take the sting out of it. Number 3, it may encourage saints in their sufferings that Christ is the great object of the persecutors' malice, and they for his sake, so that if they could reach him, they would not care for them. For so much appears in that while he was with them, they had no present use for the doctrine of sufferings, as any way like to fall on them. Number 3, when Christ has trained his people till their strength grow up, they may expect that after his sweet presence and sensible consolations, they will meet with the storm. For now he tells them of that is near approaching, which he said not at the beginning. Number 4, saints, after long sparing, may expect their trials will come thick and threefold upon them, and that their being under one trial will not be a shelter to hide them from another. For now he is not to be with them, which was a trial sad enough, and they are to make for other sad sufferings at the same time. Number 5, the Lord may so order as to send afflictions on his people when they seem to be worse provided for them, and yet they shall be better borne through than if it had been otherwise. For it might seem very unseasonable to them to try or appoint their trials with the time when they should want his bodily presence, and yet he made them in a better condition when deprived of his bodily presence, and having trials, than when enjoying it, and lacking trials, as the event did prove. This has been a reading of George Hutcheson's commentary on John 16, verses 1 to 4. www.puritanaudiobooks.net